Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week at the Better Events podcast. And in today's episode, we are talking all about how to plan a successful festival with Eventeny. And we have Cat from Eventeny, who is our guest on this episode today. And this is a really wonderful conversation because we have not talked about festivals much before on the podcast. So it is about time. There's lots of wonderful tips and tricks that are shared in this episode. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson and a very special guest who you might have heard before here on the podcast. And so without further ado, we want to jump right into it. So Mary, I'm going to toss it to you to introduce our guest.
Thank you so much. I am very pleased to introduce our guest today. Cat McDevitt has worked in festivals and events for the past 4 years. With a background in public relations, she has experienced every side of the events industry, from organizing, sponsoring, exhibiting, and as an attendee as well. This range of experience means Cat can analyze an event from multiple perspectives and understand what factors drive success, which is going to be so key to our conversation today. So thank you so much, Cat, for being here. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your bio?
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back. I'm a huge fan personally, and I'm really excited to dive into the different success factors in festivals and events. I think it'll be a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. A little bit more for our listeners of why we asked you. Again, we hinted you've been here before, so you might recognize her voice from episode 124, where we talked about managing exhibitors. And Kat works for Eventeny, who's been a partner of the podcast for the last 2 seasons, and we hear avid listeners over there. So we were just really excited. We had a couple of you guys ask, I think it was around the Better Events Conference, for us to talk about festivals and fairs. And so we figured with Eventeny and Kat's experience there, this would be a great episode where we could kind of tap into her brain, because I'll be honest, I have not planned many a festival or a fair. I've gone to them, so I'm always curious to get it from the organizer's perspective. So before we jump into it, Kat, can you introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us a bit about your background in event planning and especially festivals and fairs?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is actually in public relations and marketing. So I got into the festival industry in kind of a roundabout way. First starting out when I was doing freelance post-grad, I was working for businesses in Chicago, which is where I live, and planning events for them. It actually started out with businesses that I would work freelance for, wanting to sponsor events, and then eventually wanting to get into the events industry, whether that's like a farmer's market. I've worked for like a few garden type businesses, or like a wine tasting or networking events. So that's really when I got into it. And then when I started working with Eventeny, that's kind of what broadened my scope, the scope of my work, to large scale festivals, because we work with a lot of large scale festivals who use our software. Eventeny is an all-in-one event management software solution for things like tickets, maps, vendors, sponsors, pretty much everything you need to plan a large scale event. So that was really my first introduction into like large music festivals, or large like state fairs, or, big festivals nationwide and in Canada. So it's been a really, really interesting transition. I've been working with Eventeny coming up on 3 years now, and I've really been able to see every side of the event industry, from working with the people who are planning these festivals to giving tips on event promotion, and then also on the sponsor side as well, because my company, Eventeny, will sponsor conferences and events, and I'll negotiate the sponsorship contracts for those. But then we also will work with events and give them tips on how to get sponsors, get vendors, organize. So it's really broadened my horizons in terms of the event industry and given me a large scope. Definitely a big look into the industry as a whole, and it is a very large industry.
Absolutely. We talk about that a lot. Our industry is crazy. Like, if you can think of something random, it probably has to do with an event of some sort. And festivals, kind of like Logan said, are like a whole world in my mind that I don't fully know. Ironically, though, we are planning a pretty large festival for this summer. And so when we were talking about this episode, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited because I'm going to learn from Kat because we just started. And so there's lots to figure out. But the vibe that I kind of know of them actually, one of my first events I did when I started my business, it was more like an expo, but it was all about plants. And so it was just a ton of plants and plant vendors. And I loved like the theme and that everybody was coming together to go visit all these booths to learn about plants. I don't know. It was funny to me. And I loved that it was the thing. And so I feel like that is when I was like, what else is out there in regards to fairs and festivals? So anyway, that's just my caveat on why I'm excited about this conversation. But high level, can you just share with us what are the key parts of a festival or fair?
Totally. So I would say that there's two main aspects that you want to really consider. And this is at like the very beginning stages of your planning process. So the first, and I think the most important thing overall, is understanding your audience. And in like the PR and marketing industry, we call this your target market. And listeners are probably thinking like, oh, my attendees for my event. And that is a huge part of it. But you have multiple audiences when you're planning an event, right? You have your attendees, and then you have your sponsors. And then if you're hosting a vendor event, you also have vendors and exhibitors. And your messaging is going to be different for these groups of people. So you really want to understand who it is that you are trying to speak to. So that could mean understanding your attendee target market. Who is your festival geared towards? Is it for families? Is it a music festival where the majority of people are college students or people under 30? Is it a networking event with young professionals? Really understanding that audience is going to be key because that's how you're going to plan your marketing and plan your messaging and your promotion of your event. Putting that aside, you also want to understand how are you going to attract sponsors? So who are the businesses in your area where their target market is matching your attendee demographics? And then how are you going to get messaging out to them about sponsoring your event and get them to understand why that would be beneficial? Additionally, you're going to want to do the same thing for vendors. So if you're opening up your event for small businesses to be vendors at, you want to think about what small businesses are in your area, what's their kind of target market, who shops there, and then figure out how you're going to get the messaging out to them. So I think having a really in-depth understanding of your audience and who it is that you're trying to speak to, first of all, it just makes everything so much easier because it makes it so much easier to plan your marketing communications once you have an understanding of who it is that you're trying to reach. But it also is going to be kind of the starting point that's going to snowball and drive all of the event planning decisions you're making in the future. So I would say that's the first key thing. Then the second thing I would say is really crucial is understanding what your goals are for the event. So if it's your first time planning a festival, that's going to be different than if you've done this for 10 years. But assuming it's your first time or you're new to the industry or you're new to planning this specific type of event, you want to set goals that are beyond what I call finishing goals. So like a finishing goal would be, I want to have 10,000 attendees. But that's like your event's over by the time you figure out if you've hit that or not. You want to set benchmarks for yourself along the planning process so that you can measure your progress and see if you're on the right track. So an example of that would be event promotion. You can say, I would like to generate this many impressions, which could be like social media impressions or like news coverage or anything like that. I want to generate this many impressions before the event. And I would recommend setting what I call stretch goals. So let's say, for example, I want to have 100,000 impressions before the event. If I got 70,000, that would be pretty good. So a stretch goal is like you set a goal for yourself and then you set a benchmark at like 70, 80%, whatever. And this is how you're going to kind of measure your progress as you're planning. Also, once the event is over, this is how you're going to analyze the success of your event and make tweaks for next year. And it's important to have a very laid out kind of blueprint of what your goals are rather than just like one or two big finishing goals. Because when you go back to analyze your event, you can look at these goals that you set for yourself, see which ones you hit, which ones you didn't, and that will give you really crucial information looking back. Like hindsight is 2020. It will really make it a lot easier for you to tweak things and figure out what exactly was working and what maybe wasn't working so much instead of just having like a general idea.
Love that idea of stretch goals. I think you're right. Then, yeah, if you're underperforming them, you're still exceeding, at least that minimum you were looking for. This next question is kind of for new festival organizers, or maybe it's an organizer who's taking over a festival, so they're new to running it, but it's maybe an existing festival. With your experience at Eventeny, what common mistakes do you see festival organizers make, and do you have any tips for our listeners if they're looking to avoid them?
Totally. So I will say I'm a little biased because I do work for an event management software, but I do think it makes things a lot easier. So I would say one of the first mistakes that I see people make is trying to do every single thing by hand, especially if you're running a festival for the first time and it's like just you and maybe a couple volunteers, or even just you, which is usually the situation. We all like to think, especially, as powerful women in the events industry, we all like to think that we can do it all. You don't have to, though, is the thing. There are systems in place that can help you, even with the most minute tasks. And I think when people hear event tech, they think, I'm going to have ChatGPT plan my event. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about automating the minutia of planning an event, because when you're able to automate these little things through technology, like your event mapping or your vendor organization, things like that, that opens you up to focus on the things that really matter, which is the attendee experience. That is something that no AI or no technology can possibly replicate. You know your audience better than anyone. You know what experience you want to create for people. You should be automating things that technology can do so that you can focus on that. So that's the first mistake I would say that I see people make. The second is not harnessing the power of community marketing. So this is not really technology related at all, but I think in the marketing space and the public relations space, there's a lot of emphasis put on like social media impressions, hashtags, stuff like that. And people tend to think that's the only way that they can promote their event, but that's really not true. I can't tell you, I live in Chicago, I can't tell you how many events I've gone to because I saw a flyer on the street, or in my coffee shop or in the library. Especially if you live in an urban area or that's where you're planning your event, harness the power of community marketing. It's so cheap. Most of the time it's free. Most of the time, if you go into a coffee shop and ask if you can put a flyer up, yeah, whatever. So you can also use your target market to kind of narrow that down. So if you know that your event is geared towards college students, go into the student center of a college that's near where your event is being planned and put up some flyers there. Community marketing is a very low cost way to drive brand awareness, and it should be used in tandem with the social media, the PR, whatever sort of digital marketing efforts you're doing.
I love that because, I mean, in many cases, festivals are these large public events that really do rely on community. And so it's like a no-brainer when you say it. I'm like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. But like a crucial step, I think a lot of people probably overlook. So thank you so much for calling that out. That is super awesome. I'm learning a lot. So moving forward a little bit, how far in advance should a festival planner start working on the event? Because from my perspective, there's so many components. I don't know if you could say that there's more than other events, but like kind of there's just like a lot more vendors and a lot more of all this stuff, more attendees. So what would you say for timeline?
Totally. And I think it does depend, because it depends on what your life circumstances are, right? So if this is your full-time job and all you do is plan festivals, you might be able to start a little bit later than somebody who is kind of doing this on the side, or if you have a team that's helping you. So there's different factors that kind of play into that. But I would say, in my experience, there's 3 phases to the event planning process. There's the beginning phase, which is what I call like the conceptualization phase. This is when everything is kind of in your head and you're kind of thinking about, what's my attendee demographic? Like, where's my venue going to be? Like, how am I going to put all of this together? Then there's the planning phase. So at this point, you kind of know what your venue is going to be. You know your expected attendee count. You kind of figured out your marketing strategy, and you're trying to plan everything out. You're making your vendor applications. You're creating your map. You're finalizing, things with your venue. You're working with sponsors and trying to negotiate sponsorship contracts. This is like the core planning phase. And then there's the implementation phase, which is when you have everything finalized, you're assigning vendors to their booths and approving applications, you're sending out sponsorship deliverables, you're starting, the setup process of your event, things like that. So I would say break it apart into 3 phases and think, how long is it realistically going to take for me to complete each one of these phases? And then add a month onto that, because it's always going to be slower than you think it's going to be. But you really need to, when you break your event apart, and I think it's easier for me personally to look at it in 3 phases, think about how long is it realistically going to take for me to go through 200 vendor applications? How long is it going to take for me to research venues in my area? And then pad that with extra time. I hope that answers the question. I know it's not super straightforward.
Yes, I think that definitely answers the question for sure, because it isn't always one straight answer for anything really event related.
Mhm.
So I think that's super helpful. Thank you so much. So now we're going to shift kind of more into the logistics side of festival and fair planning. So how do you approach vendor management, artist applications, for example, layout planning, all of those things? I know that's like a huge question, but if you could just kind of get us started on those logistics.
Totally. And so, like I said, I'm really lucky because I work for Eventeny and I get to use their software, which makes it a lot easier to do some of these things. But on a broader scale, I would say once you have your venue and you can understand like what the constraints are and like how many vendors can you have, what can you feasibly do in this space, then it comes down to the organization and the layout, like you mentioned. So for example, with vendors, we talked about this actually in our last episode, but if you have vendors at your event, one of the huge mistakes I see is people putting like 3 coffee vendors next to each other. So when you're placing those vendors, you want to make sure that you're not putting the same businesses right next to each other because that can cause conflict and it's also kind of boring for the attendee. The other thing with layout is you want to have a really clear understanding of your event, of your attendee journey throughout your event. And this goes back to what I talked about in the beginning. You want to kind of be able to visualize how is your attendee going to move through your event, and is this going to be easy for them to do, or are they going to get lost? It depends on obviously how big your venue is, but having a detailed map is a huge part of that. And Eventeny is really helpful for that because we do have like an integrated mapping software. So I kind of cheat a little bit when I do this because you can figure out how many booths can fit in a certain area really easily. But having a clear path of, this is my vendor area, this is my, kids splash pad or whatever, this is food and drink, and then figuring out, all right, if I'm an attendee and I'm going to my event, what am I going to do? Me personally, first thing I do when I get there, I'm going and getting a drink. I'm going to get a cocktail. So I want to have the drink station over right when people walk in. You want to get people a little loose, get people ready to spend some money at these vendor booths. So I'm going to have the cocktail station, the bar, whatever, right here. Then I want to have the vendor shopping opportunities for people because I want my vendors to make money. So someone's going to go in, grab a drink, kind of browse the jewelry or handbags or arts and crafts or whatever at the vendor station. And then people are probably going to want to sit down. So maybe some kind of like, I'm assuming an outdoor festival, but this can be done inside as well, but some kind of like lounge area, picnic, field, whatever. And then thinking, okay, then people might want to see some entertainment. But so you're kind of visualizing, how is this attendee going to move through my event? And how can I set this up in the easiest way possible to where the attendee is always experiencing something and they don't get lost. And I mean physically lost, because that's important, but also mentally lost, where it's like, I don't know what to do next. I kind of walked through this vendor booth. Maybe I'll go like sit in this lawn chair. I don't know, whatever. So I think just having a really clear understanding of what your attendee is going to be looking for at your event is a huge part of the logistics and planning process, especially in terms of like mapping and layout. And it's also huge for event safety as well.
Before we dive more into that piece on event safety, I just am curious, Kat, because I feel like you get to be a fly on the wall in a lot of festival organizers' process. If they're not using it, like maybe before they use Eventeny, what are they using to make these maps? Please don't tell me it's like a PDF with shapes or a PowerPoint slide with shapes.
Logan, I fear it's a PDF. Like, I'm going to tell you that. Like, or I mean, sometimes people will hire out like contractors. We actually recently developed a service where we have our designers make maps for people because so many people were hiring out contractors to make their maps and paying like an arm and a leg. But so some people will do that, but most of the time people will take like a screenshot of like the Google Maps above view and then like draw little squares on it for the booth. That takes I've tried to do it before. It takes a really long time. So I would say that's like the number one thing. And then for like organizing vendors, usually it's just like a Google spreadsheet, which also can take a really long time. And it's just not really the most efficient way to do it. But I can see why people gravitate towards that, because when you're planning an event, most of the time there's not like college courses for event planners. Maybe they are. I've never taken one. So, there's no one telling you unless you're listening to the Better Events podcast, this is how you're going to do this, this, and this, you know? So I can see why people take that route. It just seems like what you would do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guilty. I made a map on a PDF, but I will say it's not for like 200 vendors. It's for like, I'm just trying to visualize myself a stage and where I would put people. But I just, God bless you, festival people who are doing that, because that just seems like so much work. And yes, we love Eventeny having a tool to save time. But earlier you hinted at talking about the layout planning and how it pertains maybe to safety. So do you mind talking a little bit more about safety and crowd management at festivals and fairs?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually a topic I'm really passionate about, because when you plan an event, you are taking, you know, essentially the safety of this 10,000 people or whoever's coming into your hands, and you want to make sure that you have a safety plan in place. So we actually work pretty closely with the Event Safety Alliance at Eventeny, which is an amazing nonprofit that has tons and tons of classes about event safety. This is not like, I don't know, they didn't pay me to say this. I'm just letting you guys know. But so they're really helpful. But I would say in terms of, I'll start with mapping. So having a detailed map is important for two reasons. First of all, your attendees know where to go. But second of all, you're going to want to share that, especially if you're hosting a really big like outdoor festival. You want to share that with like the fire station and like the city officials at your whatever town or city you're hosting your event. So it's important to have a detailed map so that city officials can look at that and kind of clear everything to where you can have this many people in this area. And those people are also going to be experts who can tell you, you know, maybe this isn't the best idea to put this here, so on and so forth. Additionally, though, it's really important to visualize your attendee journey, not just in terms of like consumerism, but if I'm an attendee and something happens, which way am I running? What am I doing? And you want to make sure that you have multiple exit points out of your event for that reason. You want to make it easy for people to know how to exit, because that's how you prevent those kind of like crowd surge situations or, you know, stampede situations. That's the last thing you want to happen. So you want, I mean, humans at the end of the day, they're like cows, right? So you want to just give them multiple points of entry and exit, and people will kind of find their way out, but you want to make it easy. So like if you have a centralized location, you want to make sure that there's like exit points, like a circle, you know, around wherever most people are going to be gathering, because people need to have multiple different ways to go. And you need to make sure that people know that they can go that way. I can't tell you how many times we've done an audit of a festival where there was something that happened and there's 5 exits and people are only taking 2 of them, because people will just go where everyone else is going, even if, you know, there's other options. So you want to have really clearly marked exit points and make sure that people know this is how you get out. Additionally to that, and I would say this is the final piece of the puzzle, you really want to have a contingency plan in place for these kinds of things. So obviously you can't dream up every potential scenario that could happen, but I think it's important to do a risk assessment of your event. So think about, at my event, what are the most likely things that could happen that would cause some kind of trouble? That could be weather events, that could be some kind of violent situation, that could be, you know, a multitude of different things. But you want to kind of analyze what are the top risks of your event, and then figure out what are people going to do in that scenario. And a lot of the time, people are going to behave the same way in different stressful situations. So it's not like planning out, this is what we're going to do if this happens, and this is what we're going to do if this happens. It's more just like figuring out what the potential risks are and figuring out in advance how you're going to mitigate those, putting that plan into your map layout, and then sharing that with city officials at your event.
This is also ringing true to my brain right now. You're catching me in the middle of this thought process. Oh my gosh. I'm like stressed out because I'm like, this is so important. But it is, it truly is. It's just part of the planning process for sure.
Yeah, no, go to the Event Safety Alliance. Once again, I'm just plugging them for fun, but they have great free resources, and we work with them as well on a lot of different things. So definitely check that out.
Amazing. Thank you. Yes, we can put the link in the show notes for that as well. Listeners, you can check them out as well. But kind of shifting then, we keep shifting kind of more and more into the event. So we'd love to start thinking future focused now. So how do you see festival planning evolving over the next few years, or what are some trends that you're seeing that are shifting now?
Totally. I definitely think, like I said earlier, technology is going to be playing a bigger part in the events industry. we're already seeing, people moving away from spreadsheets and going into, using like a software to handle applications. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that minutia being moved over to the technology side. Like I said earlier, there's some things that technology will never be able to replicate. So, definitely don't have ChatGPT write your event safety plan, but you can use technology to organize vendor applications, to create your maps, to create tickets. There are things that you can automate that will allow you to spend more time on the things that matter, which is your attendee experience, your event safety plan, securing sponsorships, driving revenue, things like that. And I think that this is going to be really important because it's so easy to get caught in the minutia of working in spreadsheets and trying to organize everything by hand. And then sometimes the attendee experience can kind of suffer because of that. And the one thing that I can tell you with absolute certainty about the events industry is attendees can tell when something feels thrown together. Even if you think they can't tell, they can tell when something just kind of feels slapdash. And that's the last thing you want. You want attendees to feel like they had an amazing experience, like everything was totally planned out, and you want them to tell their friends. So I would say automate some of those more, repetitive processes, and then take that time that you're saving and use it to develop the best experience that you possibly can for your attendees, your sponsors, and your vendors and exhibitors, because those are who's going to drive revenue for your event. Like that's how you're going to make the money so that you can do the event again next year.
Yeah, I feel like I was just thinking, another part we talked about vendors and vendor management with you, exhibitor management. And then Mary and I recently did an episode 2 weeks ago about vendor management. And that was one that I was like, when I've been as an attendee to a festival, if the vendors are having a great time, that usually trickles down to the impression I get as the attendee. If the vendors are irritated for whatever reason and grumpy, that's going to color my experience as the attendee. So you as the organizer, to your point, are, need to be thinking about those experiences to make sure your end result is what you're looking for. We're getting close to the end of our episode here, Cat, but if you could give one piece of advice to someone planning their first festival, what would it be?
Can I give you 2 answers?
Yes.
Okay, so my first answer is going to be to go to eventeny.com and get a free trial for Eventeny Pro Annual. Then my second answer is going to be to understand the time commitment that planning a festival is going to take, and really, really think about how you're going to allocate your time to creating that attendee experience. And because if the attendees have a bad time, then what was the last year of planning for? So think about how much time it's going to take, give yourself padding, and really, really focus on those things that are going to be revenue drivers, and set stretch goals. Even if you don't hit it the first year, you can analyze and you can do even better next year. But none of that is possible if you don't know your audience and you don't understand your attendees. You can't create a great experience for them if you don't know those things.
Thank you so much. And we do have a final question for you just because it's fun. We want to know, are there any upcoming festivals that you're particularly excited about or that we should know about?
Yeah, well, obviously I live in Chicago and festival season is ramping up. So excited to go to the different street festivals. We have so many fun ones here. In terms of networking, Eventeny, we've recently started launching our own networking events for event organizers. So these are actually really cool opportunities. We do them in partnership with GalaxyCon, which is a huge fandom convention that has been a longtime client of ours. And so I think we have one in July and one in August in North Carolina and one in California. And so this is a really great deal for an event organizer because I think we don't charge for these events. I think we charge like $30 for like a dinner ticket because we have it catered. But other than that, it's completely free. And included, you get a free 3-day pass to GalaxyCon and you get a celebrity meet and greet pass. So the last one I went to, I got a picture with Mike Tyson, which is super cool. And so it's just a really great opportunity for us to share some of these insights that I'm talking about with you right now with event organizers, but also give event organizers a space to network that's free and not a conference and have a little bit of fun at GalaxyCon. So definitely watch our socials on Eventeny, usually on LinkedIn, Instagram. We'll post about those as tickets open up. Obviously, it's in very high demand, so spots close fast, but definitely keep an eye out for that if you're in either Raleigh, North Carolina, or in California.
Those are very cool. Yes. And we'll link all of Eventny's socials in our show notes. You can go down there if you want to follow along. But Kat, before we let you go, anything else you'd like to add, and feel free to share where listeners can find you and find out more about Eventny.
Yeah, so if you click the link in the show notes, we actually have just developed a really cool resource that is a sponsorship proposal template. I have written hundreds of sponsorship proposals, and I've also analyzed a lot of them because I negotiate sponsorships on behalf of Eventny. So over the past month, I've been creating, I think it's like an 8 or 9 page free sponsorship proposal template that you can download. It's going to be really helpful if you're a new event organizer and you're trying to find sponsors. And in that, it also kind of walks you through what exactly to do and how to market your event. So that's a new free resource that has just dropped. So definitely check that out.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. So we'll make sure to have information in the show notes for all of you so that you can check out all of these things further. And Kat, we just so appreciate you, your expertise and your time and your partnership. So thank you so much for being here again.
Thank you so much, guys. I had so much fun.
Yes, likewise. I'm gonna for sure re-listen to this episode because there are lots of snippets that I need to take into my upcoming planning. But with that, that does bring us near the end of our episode, and we have our bonus tip before we depart, which Logan has for us today.
Yes. This week's bonus tip is talking about content and sending it to your AV team with enough time. So make sure you send your content to your tech team, your AV team, at least 24 hours before your event, so they have the content in hand when they are setting up for your event. We know things change and you need to adjust on site, but something I've just come up across in the last couple months is if your team doesn't have the content, this could delay your on-site setup and your rehearsals and lead to some unexpected overtime charges, which we know here on the podcast. We hate unexpected charges. And also just wasted time. People sitting around with nothing to do because they can't start loading content because they're waiting on you or waiting on your end client. So worst case scenario, if you can't send it 24 hours ahead of time, get early on site with everything, slides, video, music, graphics, downloaded onto a drive or a USB. And that is a good backup plan. But the more time you can give your on-site AV team the actual content they need, the better you'll be set up on site for any rehearsals and then make last minute adjustments from there.
Awesome bonus tip. Thank you so much, Logan. And thank you everyone for listening to another week of the Better Events Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. You can also connect with us directly on LinkedIn. And then if you want to learn more about Better Events or just have more content from us, you can check out our private community on Substack. And thank you so much for listening to another week. We will be back with you again next Wednesday.